Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing incredibly well. And if you're a new subscriber, you're so welcome to the channel. We're so glad you joined us because this is a channel all about fabulous stories that really transform our lives. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Mrs. Goodwin plods somewhat ungraciously down the long corridors of this Georgia-based all-girls boarding school, which is situated in the southeastern region of the United States. She monotonously patrols every night to ensure that everything is running smoothly and that the girls have dutifully gone to sleep and are managing to behave themselves, if that's at all possible. But she knows the teenagers under her charge all too well. She smiles to herself when she hears their whispers and giggles as she slowly swings open the door to check on all those under her charge. She is met with a stiff, rigid silence, with one or two of the girls in the dorm unsuccessfully pretending to snore, just to convince her that they really are asleep. But Mrs. Goodwin is not easily fooled. She sees the industrious, spirited tricks that the enterprising, roguish young girls get up to at the school. And let's just say, nothing ever surprises her. She plunges the flashlight of her torch over all the girls, flickering obtrusively on the impish faces and lumpy bodies buried beneath the folds of the bed covers. One or two of the teenagers are scrunching their eyes ever so tightly, as if they're sleeping. But Mrs. Goodwin knows that no one ever falls asleep with screwed-up eyes like that, and mouths constricted so tightly into obvious pouts that clearly convey students desperately trying to suppress their laughter. Mrs. Goodwin has expeditiously worked in this boarding school for over 30 long years now. She knows how the mischievous, artful teenagers behave, how quick-witted and sharp they actually are, certainly at being able to pull the wool over the teacher's eyes, and most of them can pretty much lie with a straight face should the need arise. When she closes the door quietly behind her, she hears the sniggers, giggles and hoots of suppressed laughter. "Did you hear me snore?" She hears one of the girls laughing. "I think I had Mrs. Goodybag's food." "No, you didn't, young lady," says Mrs. Goodwin under her breath, quietly to herself. "If you want to pull a fast one on me, try being a little subtle." Mrs. Goodwin walks away, down the long corridors and a couple of flights of steps, returning to her bedroom suite, nestled conveniently in the middle of the corridor. By all accounts, for Mrs. Goodwin, finding a job as a school matron 30 years ago had almost certainly saved her from herself. Let's just say looking after the young people here at the school had somehow insulated her from the wary woes of the world that could so easily deplete her joy. Mrs. Goodwin is well along in years, and every tiresome muscle and painful sagging twinge in her body reminds her of this fact. Mrs. Goodwin has ceased counting her age. She doesn't really want to entertain the fact that she's getting considerably older. I mean, who does? She had read an article about 10 years ago about scientists in England unable to comprehend why a woman was failing to age. It would seem that she emphatically believed she was still waiting for her husband to return from the Second World War, and her faith in his return was so pronounced that she was still stuck in a deceptive, misleading time warp, of her own creation, that is, earnestly believing with an audacious conviction that she was still that 25-year-old girl, waiting for her husband to return from the war. Let's just say in her mind's eye, she had remained that young age, both physically and psychologically. Mrs. Goodwin believed that the mind was very powerful at influencing how we aged, so dwelling on your age was almost certainly not a good idea. That being said, Mrs. Goodwin noticed how she'd slowed down considerably physically, and her tired, aching legs are now taking strain, walking down those long staircases to check the dormitories on the other floors. There are days when she really struggles on her feet, and it didn't help that she was suffering from a wee bit of arthritis in her knees and in her fingers. Life had not been easy for Nora Goodwin, when at 50 years old, her beloved husband Godfrey, a gift from the gods, had entered her life like a refreshing breeze, had died inauspiciously at 51 years old. Godfrey had been the quintessential love of her life, but he had been a big, goofy, lovable, lumbering klutz at the very best of times. The elephant in the room that would make the furniture just vibrate and shudder whenever he walked into a room, because he was that ungainly. Nora Goodwin had put this down to her husband's awkward proportions, with legs that were so long they dangled over the edge of their king-size bed, rather reminding her of a daddy-long-legged spider. Even when her husband had helped her with the washing up in the early years of their marriage, he had been so ham-handed with the dishes he'd broken more of them than successfully managed to wash any. When she had listened to him scrubbing the dishes in the sink, he sounded more like a rotary whisk on full throttle than a man gently washing dishes. "Honestly, Godfrey," she would exclaim, "can't you be gentle with anything? If you wash dishes with the zestful ebullience of a dough hook and a kneader, you're going to break every dish we have in this house." By all accounts, when they'd engaged in some ballroom dance lessons together, Godfrey Goodwin had stood on his wife's toes too many times to count, and had been so blissfully uncoordinated that the dance instructor herself had simply described him as the most bumbling dancer she'd ever had the pleasure to meet. It was clear that a graceful coordination and agility were not qualities that had ingratiated or endeared themselves to Godfrey's life, and it would seem they were to be his undoing. On the fateful, inauspicious day in question, that was quite literally to shatter Mrs. Goodwin's life, bringing down the walls of her home into a crumbling, messy heap, when Godfrey had decided emphatically that the congested autumn leaves that had blocked the drains needed to be washed out with a hosepipe, and that it would require getting up on the roof to clean them out, a job he was very eager to accomplish all on his own. He was blindly oblivious at how really cloddish he could be. Ostensibly, there are people out there that should never climb trees or roofs, and there are people that should not drive cars. Godfrey was the former. "Are you kidding me?" Nora had said to her husband. "You're not getting up on that roof. You're not exactly that steady on your feet, Godfrey. Can't you wait for Keith when he does the lawn next week? He'll help you out." It would seem that the obstinate Godfrey was not to be dissuaded from the job he had in mind to do, and would not rest until he had done it. Rather like an itch he just had to scratch, and there was no stopping him. "Oh, come on, Nora. Stop overreacting, will you? It's only a few leaves I need to get rid of, for goodness sake. It's hardly going to kill me." Nora knew that her husband was as stubborn as a mule, resolutely determined to do what she perceived was a ridiculously precarious job, especially for someone as ponderously inept and maladroit as her husband Godfrey. She quickly scurried out of the house to watch her husband climb up the long ladder to the top of the roof with his hosepipe in his hands. Nora Goodwin's heart leapt into her mouth as she observed her bumbling husband literally stumbling over the roof, like Laurel and Hardy making a spectacle of themselves for one of their silent movies, or like an inebriated drunk. It would have been comical to watch if it hadn't been so disturbingly worrying. "Right, I'm ready, Nora. You can switch on the hosepipe for me," Godfrey had called out to her. "No, I don't think this is a good idea," she had said, with hands on hips in a defiant gesture, protesting as much as she could. "Must you do this, Godfrey? You don't look very sturdy on your feet. You know that you can be so cack-handed with things at the very best of times. I'm worried you're going to slip and fall and hurt yourself badly." Godfrey smiles down reassuringly at his wife, so sweetly, in fact, that it almost makes Nora's heart melt. "You worry too much, sweetheart. I'm absolutely fine. Now switch on the hose, won't you?" Nora obliges her husband's wishes, and as she expected, the hosepipe dances in her husband's hands like an excitable python, and more water was getting on the roof than down the drain pipes. The roof had become like a perilous ice skating rink. So Nora quickly retreats to switch the water off. "What are you doing, dear? Why did you switch the tap off? I need the water on." "Because, Godfrey, look at yourself. You're not getting any water where it's needed in the drain pipes. Look at you. Your clothes are soaking wet, they're sopping, and there's water all over the roof." Then, as she watches her husband trying to maintain his balance, like someone attempting to walk a tightrope, Her husband wobbles clumsily, slips, and comes crashing down to the concrete paving below. His head bursts open like an ostrich egg, and it was over for him so fast. Mrs. Goodwin had stood there in abject silence. Her horrified, disbelieving eyes become as wide as saucers. Her mouth hangs open. Her stomach is doing flip-flops. She stands there like a plastic mannequin in a boutique, as white as a sheet, unable to even move a muscle. How long she stood there, she never remembered. But then the most dreadful scream emanated from the back of her throat that surprised even her. The noise echoed across the street with the shrillness of an ambulance siren. Her next-door neighbour, Gertrude Taylor, still in curlers, comes dashing very quickly out of her house to see what the god-awful commotion is all about, and on seeing Godfrey Goodwin, his head splattered across the asphalt like scrambled eggs, she too lets out a shrill scream. And let's just say, all eyes knew it was far too late for Godfrey Goodwin. "Silly man," says Mrs. Goodwin. "Silly, silly man. Why wouldn't he listen to me?" Nora Goodwin retreats from the dormitories, back to her beloved suite, where she'll soon return to the gilded picture of her beloved husband, which she has faithfully parked on her bedside table. He has remained a mere 51 years old, but she's now in her 80s. What would he make of her now, she would often wonder to herself. I mean, the age difference between the two of them would be immense. She jiggles the keys as she walks down the passageway, glancing briefly out at the dark night, over the ornate wrought-iron balustrades that frame the edges of the corridors, creating a balcony-like effect over the school grounds. But in the light of day, the views stretch out for many miles, overlooking the most spectacular, prepossessing views of the Georgia countryside. On the right-hand side of the school grounds is a distinctive square-shaped building. It has white small pokey windows and is the school changing rooms with lots and lots of lockers. There is a large square swimming pool with an elevated seating area for galas and swimming competitions. About 100 feet away from this seating area is a sumptuous wood grove that is begging to be explored, as it has a beguiling allure, comprised mainly of sweet gums, American beeches, oaks, and long-leafed pines. On the left-hand side of the school premises are the long-flowing, perfectly manicured verdant lawns, scattered liberally with imposing mature oak trees, boasting large sculptural deportments and generous umbrella-like canopies that can shield many a hot student from the glaring, scorching hot weather. One of the largest oak trees in the grounds covers a concrete table that is used at tea time to provide the pupils that board at the school with orange juice, tea or coffee, and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for morning and afternoon breaks. It's only on Sunday afternoon that the sandwiches are replaced with jelly donuts and custard slices, something the children always look forward to. Mrs. Goodwin has fully embraced the rumours over the years, that is, well, as long as she's been matron at the school, and has been quick to inform any new girl about the spectral entity, or the resident ghost, to her advantage. It's always helped the restless young girls in the dormitories to dutifully retire to bed and behave themselves, as many a pupil has been desperately afraid of encountering the ghost of a 1940s headmistress called Mrs. Priscilla Lennox, whom is said to walk up and down the corridors here, and by all accounts was a very formidable woman. At first Mrs. Goodwin believed that the rumours about the ghost were idle speculation and the indulgence of an overactive imagination, but now she wasn't quite so sure. Mrs. Goodwin remembers one airy night in particular, when she was walking down the school corridors, alone, with her torch, when something untoward happened, of which she can find no rational explanation. She had been patrolling all the dormitories, walking down different flights of steps to the various different levels, looking into the dormitories to check on the sleeping students, under her diligent charge. She could hear the clip-clop sound of women's shoes walking down the corridors. She flashed her light to the left and right, from where she'd heard the idiosyncratic sound, but saw nothing. She knew that it couldn't be any of the residential pupils, as everybody was expected to wear sheepskin slippers. So then who was walking down the corridors late at night, wearing heels? "Hello! Hello!" she calls out in the darkness. "Can I help you? Is anybody there? Is anybody there?" but no one answered her. She was left with an ominous sense of foreboding. "Hello! Hello!" she repeated a few more times, but heard absolutely nothing, although the footsteps had stopped. But she got the sense that someone was watching her from the dark shadows. She was so frightened she dashed back to her quarters, spending the rest of the night sleeping with the lights on. But it did give her pause for reflection. Had she encountered the ghost of Priscilla Lennox? She was to learn that on several occasions people claimed to have heard the clippity-clop of women's heeled shoes. Mrs. Goodwin knows that beyond the so-called ghost here is something infinitely worse, much more ambiguous, loitering around in the dark shadows on the school grounds. Indeed, something that is so terribly bad that ever since the harrowing experience she has never been able to go anywhere near the Woodgrove. If the pupils knew about her secret, they would tremble in their boots, never get a wink of sleep at night. So she had wisely kept this clandestine secret, all to herself. One night she remembers being awoken to the sound of frantic girls' voices hammering on her door, calling out her name in an alarmed frenzy. She had woken up with a violent start, her worst fears realised. Had one of the children had a dreadful accident? Was someone hurt? Her heart began pounding in her chest as she nervously, apprehensively opens the door of her suite, to be welcomed by a sea of earnest, apprehensive faces that are staring at her with terrified eyes, bodies trembling like a vertical line of wobbling jellies. "What on earth is going on here? Mrs. Goodwin?" One of the girls is trembling. "Something is out there. It's howling. It's making a very strange noise, a terrifying noise. We're so scared. We can't get to sleep." "You go back to bed at once," said Mrs. Goodwin. "I'm sure it's absolutely nothing. It's possibly just a mountain lion or a coyote. Now off to bed. Do you hear me?" The young, rattled, chagrined and flustered girls obediently obey, trotting off to their dormitories. But it's clear they don't believe that what they heard was a coyote. In truth, nor does Nora. But she had to suggest that it was, to bring peace to the chaotic turbulence of the very discountenanced youngsters. She knows, of course, they're well familiar with the animal sounds here in this part of the world, and they're not acquainted to airy, disembodied, haunting sounds like this, that almost certainly invite every single hair on the back of your neck to stand up on edge. Mrs. Goodwin, on hearing the discomposing sound herself, finds that the mysterious, unsettling noise seems to pound at her chest like an impassioned wrestler's powerful punches, echoing through the looming dark shadows of the night, bouncing buoyantly around the lawns and buildings of the schoolhouse. It is such a disturbing wail, like nothing she's ever heard before. Nora Goodwin would like nothing better than to retreat back to her bedroom, closing the door behind her and forgetting all about everything, pretending that the ominous noise had never so rudely impregnated her reality like this. But something is out there, and she needs to find out what it is. She's the matron of the school, after all. It's her responsibility to keep the children safe from harm's way, even if it means doing something that seeps over the edge of her comfort zone. It's called being dependably responsible. An unsettling feeling, fraught with a restless pessimism, seems to saunter precariously down her spine, and she instinctively senses something is terribly wrong. Mrs. Goodwin is not exactly a courageous woman, at the very best of times, but despite her reluctant reticence and her vacillating hesitancy, her desire to protect the pupils under her charge trumps all her inhibitions and is far more significant than her own fear. "Get a grip, woman," she scolds herself. "Get a grip." She hurries into her room to retrieve a rifle, a secret possession she decided to keep after learning about so many school shootings across America. Let's just say, if someone with a sawn-off shotgun entered the premises with the intention of harming one of the students here, she was determined to come to their rescue with a means of physical defence. If it meant having to kill the perpetrator, she would do it without even batting an eyelid, as protecting the children is her priority, one she takes very seriously indeed. Mrs. Goodwin grabs the rifle and her torch, trudging down the corridors and the sweeping flights of steps. She moves as quickly as she can, in her very impractical pink fluffy slippers, that are not designed for navigating the yards on the premises here, while her dressing gown is tied tightly around her ample middle. When she reaches the bottom step on the ground floor, she plunges the key into the padlock that holds the lock in place. The chain jingles, sliding on the floor. The lock opens and loosens, while the wrought iron gate squeaks as it swings open. She cautiously locks the gate behind her, throwing the keys into her pocket, scurrying quickly past the headmistress's office. She can see the attractive silhouette of the school building on the edges of the corridor, with its large, friendly French windows that seem less welcoming tonight. Luckily, the outside lights are left on throughout the night, so that Mrs. Goodwin can see her way clearly past all the school classrooms. There is nothing congenial about this night whatsoever. It seems to claw at her with a hostile, vengeful ambience, as if the air she is breathing is tainted by an unsavoury energy. She wilfully disregards those instinctive whispering voices in her mind, warning her not to proceed any further with her search. She hears the discomposing sound again, and discerns it's coming from the swimming pool area that is framed by a very substantial woodgrove. She hurriedly steps up her speed and runs across the grass, richly anointed and soaked with a moist dew that rubs against her pyjama bottoms, brushing her exposed ankles, making them soggy and wet. The night is menacing, bodeful, hostile in its demeanour, for even the gay shrill of the crickets and frogs has been extinguished, and the silence, like cancer, seems to grow through the night, like a tenacious, indomitable weed. And that is when she sees the provocative, haunting silhouette of only what the darkest, most malevolent nightmares can possibly be made of. She sees the shape of a huge canine wolf-like head, howling up at the moon. But this thing, whatever it is standing up on two legs like a man. I mean, how is that possible? It's easily over 8 foot tall, covered in thick black dense hair, with overlong arms that travel beyond the knees, and human-like hands and feet, with claws like that of a wolf. The creature continues to howl up at the moon, as if worshipping it like some kind of a demigod. Nora Goodwin's torchlight is fixed on the creature's back. What the hell is that? She thinks to herself. Then the most terrible thing happens. The creature slowly turns around, swivelling his head, to look directly at her, with bright red blazing eyes that sear through her like burning red-hot coals, that sear to the core of her heart. Nora Goodwin recoils in horror. She is appalled and disgusted by what she is perceiving. She freezes like an ice statue at a lavish banquet. Even her legs seem to stick to the ground, as if they're entrenched in bags of cement, so she can't even move a muscle. The creature has a muzzle so thickly doused in blood that droplets are literally dribbling off its jawline. It spitefully retracts its lips back to expose the most menacing mouthful of sharp canine teeth that are deplorably intimidating. It lets out the most gut-wrenching growl. Nora wants to scream, but there is a frog in her mouth. Her voice box has been seized, hijacked, held hostage and to ransom, to the most frightful, deadly fear. This creature looks like something so repugnant, so vile, that even the gates of hell are offended by it. They have regurgitated him from their depths, vomiting him out into our reality. Nora can feel an intense loathing, a despicable hatred emanating from this creature as it stares her down intently, with a nauseating wrath. She knows her life is over when the creature lunges towards her. She is like a little mouse, frozen by such a malignant, cruel terror that she has become dinner for this beast, although by the looks of things he has eaten already. He is lunging towards her. She notices a dark silhouette in the forest. It screams like a banshee, in outraged indignation. Then hundreds of rocks are being hurled and thrown at the wolf-like creature, whom was about to attack Mrs. Goodwin. But now his attention has been miraculously diverted. His feathers are ruffled. He's very piqued by this noble interference that has incensed his haughty arrogance and pride. The creature becomes inflamed by fury and roars viciously. He dashes into the woodgrove after his assailant. Nora Goodwin knows something in the woodgrove saved her life that night. She suddenly realises that this is her quintessential opportunity to escape to freedom. So she leapt out of her impractical pink slippers that would seriously hamper and jeopardise her progress, and charged like a March hare, escaping to the safe confines of its burrow. She does not know how she managed, in an urgently hurried, struggled scramble and muddled, disorientated confusion, to make it safely back to her living quarters, or how she succeeded to open the padlock on the keychain, with hands trembling and fingers as slick as butter, or how she dashed up the staircase and retreated safely back into her bedroom. But she did. It was as if her body was operating robotically. The following day she informs the boarders that the strange sound that they all heard was just an injured coyote, but judging by their disbelieving expressions, they hadn't fallen for her creative lie, which she thought might offer them a measure of solace, but it would seem she was wrong. One thing was for sure, none of those boarders would be allowed anywhere near that woodgrove from now on. But her experience with that werewolf-like creature would remain under lock and key. It was reassuring to note, after doing much research online about what she'd encountered, that there were other people, especially people visiting the Appalachian Mountains, that had experienced something as outlandish as she had done. Suffice to say, 76 miles of the Appalachian Trail are actually in Georgia, which starts in Fannin County, in Springer Mountain. So it wasn't impossible for these wolf-like beasts to be seen here in Georgia, possibly originating from those mountains. 1 month later, Nora Goodwin studies her reflection in the mirror, something she avoids doing whenever possible. She decides that her face looks like a wizened tortoise, wearing an unflattering bow-like haircut of wispy grey hair on its head. Even her brown, soulful eyes seem more sunken these days in their sockets. Over the years, Mrs. Goodwin has the responsibility of being a mother-like, nurturing figure to all the young ladies under her charge. She has helped nurse the scrapes from falls down the passageway with band-aids, and helped nervous girls deal with tormenting nightmares by offering them reassuring words of encouragement. What she has to do today is not a job for the faint-hearted, but it has to be done. This is a responsibility entrusted to her alone by the headmistress of the school. It is the worst part of her job, but if anyone has got to do it, she would rather it be her. She straightens out her tweed skirt, which is rather tight over her extended belly, and darts quickly down the stairs to the science laboratory, where she's been informed by the headmistress that the class in progress is currently engaged in looking at specimens of bacteria under the slides of their microscopes. Mrs. Goodwin knocks on the door, which is opened by Miss Sinclair, the science teacher, who gives Mrs. Goodwin a warm smile. "What can I do for you, Nora?" she asks. "If you could please ask Mackenzie to come to my room right now, when she's ready. I need a quick word with her. It's terribly important," says Mrs. Goodwin, popping her head around the door and giving Mackenzie a warm nod. Mackenzie's face grows as white as a sheet, as all eyes dive towards the young girl in hoops of sympathy. If the matron is calling out Mackenzie to her quarters, they know the news is not good. Rachel Dyer, who is Mackenzie's best friend, gives her an encouraging nudge. "I'm sure it's nothing, Mackenzie," she says, trying to hide the doubt between her comforting words. "I'll come with you if you like." "No, it's all right," says Mackenzie, straightening the skirt of her school uniform. "Like you say, it's probably nothing." What she says, she doesn't mean. Mackenzie is in no doubt that Mrs. Goodwin calling her back to her suite is not nothing, but she's determined to remain positive. She leaves the classroom with fear gripping her heart so tightly she could swear it's almost stopped beating. Her mouth is impregnated with a baleful bitterness that has soured her taste buds. It feels as if her legs have almost been swept away by a landmine, as she can barely feel them beneath her at all, as she glides up 3 flights of stairs to Miss Goodwin's suite that is parked in the centre of the dormitories, on the landing of the 3rd floor. She knocks on the door so quietly, as she hopes Mrs. Goodwin might not have heard her. Then she can just run away and not face what she's about to hear now. "Come in, Mackenzie," says Mrs. Goodwin. Mackenzie cautiously presses open the door, her blue eyes glancing around Mrs. Goodwin's suite. She's never been in the sheltered intimacy of Mrs. Goodwin's living quarters before. At least not like this, so close up and personal. She observes that in the far corner of the room is a nifty-looking kitchen, done in an eclectic design. In the furthest corner of the room is a very wide, spectacular French window, overlooking the street, with its absolutely exquisite views, and a long ribbon of asphalt with large oak trees that gracefully frame either side of the street. There's a walnut sleigh bed, parked directly under the window, adorned with very glamorous vintage-looking burgundy covers. There's an inconspicuous door to the right, left slightly ajar, that she assumes leads into a private bathroom. She's standing in the living room area, surrounded by sumptuous-looking couches and a glass coffee table lined with interesting books with subjects like the Egyptian pharaohs and famous archaeological discoveries. There's a book on the Great Migration in Kenya. She had no idea that Mrs. Goodwin's interests ran so deep. "Please sit down over there, Mackenzie," says Mrs. Goodwin in a very gentle voice, pointing to a neat single upholstered chair. She sits at the edge of the chair nervously, her back as straight as a pencil, her fingers twitching, her legs tapping the carpet. Mrs. Goodwin pours Mackenzie a Coca-Cola over a large glass of ice cubes and hands it directly to the girl. "I'd like you to take a couple of sips of this," she says. "I've got something to tell you, something of a distressing nature, so you're going to need the sugar." So there we are. We're at the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and it's very, very exciting. We've got a lovely Bigfoot encounter coming up, so don't miss it. Until next time, goodbye and good night.